The first time I paid that mortgage, it was an act of love. The 40th time, nobody in that house even remembered my name was still on the paperwork. My name is Walter Voss. I'm 72 years old. I've lived in the same brick house on Cedar Hollow Road outside Dayton, Ohio for 36 years, and I buried my wife, Doris, 3 winters ago. I spent 44 years as a machinist at the same plant, the kind of work where you learn that a thing built wrong at the foundation will fail eventually, no matter how good it looks on top. I raised one son, Ryan, mostly on my own those last few years while Doris was sick, and I would have told you, right up until the phone rang that Tuesday evening in November, that Ryan and I had a good relationship. Solid. Built to last. I tell you all this so you understand exactly what I believed before I tell you what happened. Tuesday, November 4th, 6:40 in the evening. I was in the kitchen finishing dinner. The same chair Doris used to sit in across from me still pulled out from the table, because I never could bring myself to push it back in, when my phone rang. Ryan's name on the screen. I picked up expecting to talk about Thanksgiving, which was 3 weeks out, same as every year since he and Melissa got married, hosted at their place in Beaver Creek, me bringing my green bean casserole because it was Doris's recipe and somebody had to keep making it. "Hey Dad," he said, and something in his voice was already wrong. "Careful. Rehearsed. Hey son, you calling about Thursday? I was gonna ask what time you wanted me there." There was a pause. A pause I felt in my chest before he even said the words. "Dad, listen. Melissa's parents are coming this year. Her whole side, actually. And we've been talking, and we just think, with everything, it might be better if you sat this one out." I set my fork down. Sat it out. "It's not a big deal, Dad. It's just, you know how you get sometimes, bringing up Mom, and Melissa's dad is a pretty formal guy, and we just want this one to go smooth. Maybe you could do your own thing this year. Or come by after for pie." I sat there in my kitchen, in the house I'd lived in for 36 years, holding a phone with my only son's voice coming out of it telling me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving, and for a moment I genuinely could not find a single word to say back to him. "Dad? You there?" "I'm here," I said, and I kept my voice level, the way I'd learned to keep a lathe steady even when the metal was fighting you. "All right, Ryan. If that's what you and Melissa decided." "It's not like that, Dad, it's just." I said all right. I heard myself say it, calm, final, the exact tone I used to use on the shop floor when a decision had already been made and there was no use arguing the machine into working differently than it was built to work. We hung up a few minutes later. Some small talk about the kids, nothing that mattered. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time after, Doris's empty chair across from me, my dinner going cold, turning that phrase over and over in my head. You know how you get sometimes. 44 years of showing up. Every birthday, every graduation, every 2 a.m. phone call when he was in college and scared about something that turned out to be nothing. And somewhere in the last few years, without me ever noticing the exact moment it happened, I had become something to be managed around instead of someone to be included. I got up, walked to the small home office Doris and I had built into the back bedroom, and opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, the one with a lock I hadn't touched in longer than I could remember. Inside was a folder I hadn't looked at in 3 years. I sat down, opened it, and started reading numbers I had almost let myself forget I was still paying. The folder was labeled, in Doris's handwriting from years back, Ryan House. Inside it was every statement, every transfer, every piece of paper documenting something I had never once told my son directly, not because I was hiding it, but because I never thought it mattered enough to bring up. I thought it was just what a father did. Here's what that folder told me, laid out cold and plain on paper the way numbers always tell the truth whether or not people want to hear it. 6 years ago, Ryan called me in a panic. He and Melissa had just closed on their house in Beaver Creek, a nice place, more than they could really afford on his salary alone, but Melissa had wanted it and Ryan had never been good at telling her no. 4 months after closing, Ryan lost his job in a round of layoffs at his company. He came to me, sat right at my kitchen table where Doris used to sit, and told me they were 2 months from losing the house. I didn't think twice. I set up an automatic transfer straight into their mortgage escrow account, $1,100 a month, meant to cover them until Ryan found new work. He found a job 4 months later. I meant to stop the transfer then. I genuinely meant to. But 4 months turned into him mentioning Melissa wanted to redo the kitchen, and I figured, well, the money's already flowing, no sense disrupting things, I'll let it ride a little longer. A little longer turned into a habit neither of us ever revisited out loud. Not once, in 6 years, did Ryan ask me to stop. Not once did he ask me to start again either, because as far as I could tell, he'd simply stopped thinking about where that $1,100 was coming from every single month. I sat in that office at 9 p.m. doing math I probably should have done years ago. $1,100 a month, 72 months. Just under $80,000. $80,000 of Doris's and my retirement, sent quietly into my son's mortgage while he built a life that, according to the phone call I'd just gotten, no longer had room in it for me at his own dinner table. I want to be honest with you about what I felt sitting there. It wasn't rage. Rage would have been simpler. What I felt was something colder and slower, the feeling of watching a wall you built with your own hands, plank by plank, over years, suddenly show you a crack running all the way through it that had probably been there the whole time. I called my daughter, Karen, who lives 2 hours away in Columbus, and has never once asked me for anything she didn't offer to pay back. I don't usually call this late. Dad? Everything okay? I told her about the phone call. About Thanksgiving. I watched her go quiet on the other end the way people go quiet when they're deciding how much to say. Dad, she finally said, did Ryan ever tell you that Melissa's parents don't know you're the one who's basically kept them in that house? Melissa told me last Christmas her dad thinks Ryan, and Ryan alone, pulled through that layoff on his own steam. Ryan never corrected it. I sat there holding the phone, looking at $80,000 of numbers on paper in front of me, hearing that my own son had let another family believe he'd built something entirely by himself, using a foundation I had quietly poured under him without ever asking for a single ounce of credit. Karen, I said slowly, I think I need to make a couple calls tomorrow. To the bank. And to Gerald. Gerald Whitfield? Dad, what are you thinking? I looked at Doris's empty chair through the office doorway, at her handwriting on that folder tab, at 36 years of a house we built and 6 years of quietly rebuilding somebody else's. I'm thinking, I said, that a foundation only holds up a house that still knows it's there. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the bed Doris and I shared for 40 years, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles, running back through every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every quiet handshake goodbye at the end of a visit, trying to find the exact moment I'd become optional in my own son's life. I couldn't find it. That was the worst part. There was no single moment. It had happened the way rust happens, a little at a time, so slow you only notice once the metal's already given way underneath your hand. Wednesday morning, I made coffee at 6 a.m., same as I had every single day since I retired, and I sat at the kitchen table with that folder still open in front of me. I didn't call the bank yet. I wanted to understand the full shape of things first, the way I always did before I touched a machine that wasn't running right. You don't start turning bolts until you know exactly what's broken. I called my old friend Harold Pruitt, retired now like me, but he'd spent 30 years as a loan officer before he retired, knew mortgages inside and out. I asked him, without giving him the whole story yet, what happens if a co-signed automatic contribution to somebody's mortgage stops? Depends on the loan, he said. If your son's mortgage is in his and his wife's name only, and you've just been feeding money into their escrow account voluntarily, you can stop that transfer anytime you want, Walter. No paperwork, no lawyer needed for that part. You just stop it. The question is whether they can cover the payment without you. And if they can't? Harold went quiet a moment. Then I'd guess you're about to find out real quick how well that house was actually doing before you started helping. I thanked him and hung up, and I sat there with my coffee going cold, same as my dinner had the night before, thinking about Melissa's father believing Ryan had pulled through that layoff alone. Thinking about the phrase "you know how you get sometimes," said to me by a son who apparently didn't think I deserved to know how much I'd quietly been holding up. That afternoon, my grandson called me. Tyler, 16, Ryan and Melissa's oldest, calling not because anyone told him to, but because he was working on a school project about family history and wanted to know about my time at the plant. We talked for almost an hour. He asked me about Doris, about how Grandma and I met, about what Dayton looked like back when I was his age. It was the first conversation in weeks where I felt like I mattered to somebody in that house for a reason that had nothing to do with money. Near the end of the call, almost as an afterthought, Tyler said, "Hey, Grandpa, are you coming Thursday?" Mom said something about it being different this year, but she didn't really explain. I felt something twist in my chest, hearing that this decision had already trickled down to my grandson as a vague, unexplained fact of life, something adjusted around him without a real reason given. "I'm not sure yet, buddy," I said, which was true. "But I want you to know something. Whatever happens with Thanksgiving, That's got nothing to do with how much I love you. You understand me? Yeah, Grandpa. Love you too. I hung up that phone and sat in my kitchen a long time, and for the first time since Ryan's call the night before, I felt something harden in me that wasn't anger exactly. It was clarity. The same clarity I used to feel right before making the final cut on a piece that had to be exact, no room for a second try. I picked up the folder, closed it, and set it by my keys on the counter, right where I'd see it first thing in the morning. I had a feeling I was going to need it soon. Thursday morning, 3 days before Thanksgiving, I called Gerald Whitfield's office. Gerald had handled Doris's and my estate paperwork for almost 20 years, ever since he was a young attorney just starting out, and I was a stubborn machinist who didn't trust lawyers until one proved himself. Gerald had proven himself 100 times over since. His assistant put me through within the hour. "Walter," Gerald said, warm as always. "Been a while. What's going on?" I told him everything. The Thanksgiving call. The folder. $80,000 over 6 years, sent quietly, no strings, no acknowledgement, no correction of the story Ryan had apparently let Melissa's family believe about pulling through that layoff entirely on his own. I told him about Tyler's confused phone call, about not knowing why Grandpa wasn't coming this year. Gerald listened without interrupting, same as he always did, and when I finished, he was quiet a moment. "Walter, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you want to punish your son, or do you want clarity?" It was a fair question, and I sat with it. I don't want to punish him, Gerald. I raised him better than what showed up in that phone call, and some part of me still believes the man I raised is in there. But I am done being a resource that gets used quietly and excluded loudly. Those two things can't keep happening in the same family. "Then here's what I'd suggest," Gerald said. "First, the mortgage contribution. That was always a gift, never a loan, never formalized. You have every right to stop it whenever you choose, no explanation required. But if you want to do this cleanly, I'd recommend converting what remains into a formal, documented arrangement first, so there's a clear record showing exactly what you've provided all these years. Not for a lawsuit, for clarity, so nobody in that family can ever again pretend it didn't happen. And after that, we look at your will. You mentioned Ryan's still listed as primary beneficiary on the house here in Dayton, the one you and Doris built your whole life in. I'd suggest we revisit that too, Walter. Not out of spite, out of the same clarity. Make sure what you've built lands where it will actually be appreciated by people who show up for you the same way you've shown up for them." We spent that morning going through details. Gerald drew up documentation itemizing every transfer I'd made toward Ryan's mortgage over 6 years, an actual paper trail, undeniable, exact. Then we turned to the house on Cedar Hollow Road, to Doris's jewelry, to the small collection of tools in my garage that had belonged to my own father before me, each one meaningful in a way no appraiser could ever price correctly. I named Karen as executor. I named Tyler, my grandson, as the eventual recipient of my father's tools, to be given to him directly when he turned 21, not funneled through his parents first. I adjusted the house. Ryan's name did not disappear entirely. I want to be honest about that, because this was never about erasing my son. But it changed. Significantly. Conditionally. In ways that would only become clear to him if certain things did not change first. "Are you certain, Walter?" Gerald asked, the way he always did at the end of these conversations, watching me over his glasses. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," I said. "I spent 44 years building things that were meant to last, Gerald. I'm not about to spend what's left of my life financing my own disappearance from my son's table." He smiled, the tired, satisfied smile of a man who'd heard plenty of angry fathers over the years and recognized, correctly, that I wasn't one of them. "Then let's get it done," he said. "And Walter, stopping that transfer. When do you want that effective?" I looked out his office window at the gray November sky, thinking about Thursday, about the empty chair I'd be occupying at nobody's table. "Today," I said. "Effective today." I drove home from Gerald's office in a quiet I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember, the specific quiet that comes after a decision has actually been made instead of just considered. I stopped at the bank on the way, sat down with a young loan officer named Priya who pulled up the automatic transfer I'd set up 6 years earlier, confirmed every detail, and canceled it while I sat there watching. "This takes effect immediately?" I asked. "Yes, sir. No further transfers will process starting with this month's cycle." I thanked her and drove home, and for the first time in 6 years, $1,100 stayed in my own account instead of leaving quietly for a house I wasn't welcome inside anymore. I didn't call Ryan that day. I didn't call him Friday either, or Saturday. Thanksgiving came and went, and I spent it exactly where Ryan had suggested I might, on my own, except I didn't sit home feeling sorry for myself the way I think he pictured. Karen drove up from Columbus with her husband and brought a full dinner, turkey and all, and we sat at my kitchen table, Doris's old chair still pulled out across from me, and we talked for 4 hours about nothing in particular and everything that mattered. It was, if I'm honest, one of the better Thanksgivings I'd had in years, quieter, smaller, but entirely, completely mine. I thought about Ryan once during dinner, wondered what his table looked like, whether Melissa's father was impressed with the smooth, formal gathering they'd wanted so badly to protect. I didn't wonder with anger. I wondered the way you wonder about whether in a city you used to live in distant, mild, no longer quite your concern in the way it once was. The following Tuesday, December 2nd, my phone rang at 8:15 in the evening. Ryan's name on the screen again, but this time something in the timing told me exactly what this call was going to be about. "Dad," he said, and his voice had none of the careful rehearsal from 3 weeks earlier. This voice was tight, confused, a little scared. "Dad, we got a letter from the mortgage company. It says our payment didn't process this month. Some kind of return transfer notice. Do you know anything about that?" I sat in my kitchen at my own table, in my own quiet house, and I let a small silence sit on the line before I answered, not out of cruelty, but because some things deserve a moment of wait before you say them out loud. "Ryan," I said, "I imagine that letter is about the transfer I've been sending into your mortgage account every month for the last 6 years. The one that started when you lost your job and never really stopped." Dead silence on the other end. "What transfer, Dad?" $1,100 a month, Ryan. Since the layoff. It's how you and Melissa kept that house when you couldn't cover it alone. I never told you because I didn't think it needed saying. I thought that's just what a father does. Dad, I didn't know that was still happening. I thought that stopped years ago. It didn't stop, son. It just stopped being noticed. There's a difference. I could hear him breathing on the other end, processing something that was clearly rearranging itself in real time. "Why would you stop it now?" he finally asked, and there was something almost wounded in the question, as if I'd broken a rule neither of us had ever actually agreed to. I looked at Doris's empty chair across the table, at the folder still sitting on my counter, at the quiet, ordinary Tuesday evening I now got to spend in a house that was entirely, undeniably mine. "Because 3 weeks ago," I said, "you told me I wasn't welcome at your table, Ryan. And I decided I wasn't going to keep quietly building a table I wasn't invited to sit at." The line went silent for what felt like a full minute. I let it sit there. I've learned at 72 that silence is sometimes the only honest thing left to offer somebody who's just been handed a truth they weren't prepared for. "Dad, that's not. Thanksgiving wasn't about you not being welcome. It was just one dinner, one time, because of Melissa's parents." "Ryan," I said, cutting in gently but firmly, the way I used to when a young apprentice at the plant was about to make the same mistake twice. "I need you to actually hear what I'm about to say instead of managing it. You told your wife's family that you got through that layoff on your own. You let them believe that. For 6 years, Karen tells me, nobody in that family has any idea your father-in-law kept a roof over your kids' heads. And then, when it came time to decide who belonged at your table, I was the one asked to step outside. That's not fair, Dad. That's not what I was thinking about when we made that call. Maybe not consciously," I said. "But somewhere along the way, I stopped being your father who helps, and I became money that shows up automatically, no different than a paycheck you stop thinking about the source of. That's what happens when help goes quiet too long, Ryan. People stop seeing where it comes from. They just start expecting it, and eventually, they start being embarrassed by the very thing that saved them." He didn't have an answer for that right away. I could hear Melissa's voice faintly in the background, asking him something sharp, and I could hear him move to another room to keep talking. "Dad, what do we do? The payment's due. We don't have $1,100 extra just sitting around, not with the kids' activities and—" "Ryan," I said, and I felt something steady settle into my voice, the same steadiness I used to feel gripping a tool I'd used 10,000 times before. "That's not actually my question to answer anymore. I spent 6 years answering it quietly, without being asked, without being thanked, without so much as a mention to your own father-in-law. I'm not doing that anymore. Not because I don't love you. Because I love you enough to stop letting you build a life on a foundation you don't even know is there." "So you're just done?" Just like that. No, I said. I'm not done. I'm your father, Ryan, and that doesn't stop. But I am done being invisible while I'm useful and inconvenient while I'm present. Those two things can't keep living in the same house together. You're going to have to choose which version of me you actually want in your life, because I've decided I'm only offering the one now. He was quiet again, and this time I let it stretch even longer, because I could tell he was actually thinking, maybe for the first time in years, instead of managing. I need to talk to Melissa, he finally said. Can I call you back? You can call me whenever you're ready to actually talk, Ryan. Not manage. Talk. We hung up. I sat at my kitchen table a long while after that, the December dark pressing against the kitchen window, Doris's chair still pulled out across from me the way it had been for 3 years now, and for the first time since that phone call 3 weeks earlier, I didn't feel hollow. I felt something closer to solid ground. 2 days later, on Thursday evening, a car pulled into my driveway I recognized instantly. Ryan's alone, no Melissa beside him in the passenger seat. I watched him sit in that driveway for almost a full minute before he got out, hands in his coat pockets, breath fogging in the cold December air under my porch light. I opened the door before he reached it. Dad, come on in, it's freezing, I said, and I meant it plainly, no edge to it. Whatever this conversation was going to be, it wasn't going to happen with my son standing on a cold porch like a stranger. We sat in the living room, the same room where he'd opened Christmas presents for 31 years, where Doris used to sit in the corner chair reading while Ryan built towers out of blocks on the floor in front of the fireplace. I made coffee, because that's what Doris always did in hard conversations, offer something warm first, and I'd never once seen a reason to stop that habit just because she wasn't the one making it anymore. Ryan wrapped both hands around his mug and stared into it for a long moment before he spoke. I talked to Melissa, and then I talked to her dad, actually. Told him the truth. All of it. About the layoff, about you covering us for 6 years, about all of it. How'd that go? Ryan let out a short, humorless laugh. Not great, honestly. He was pretty quiet about it. I think he's still processing that the son-in-law he thought pulled himself up by his bootstraps had a father quietly making sure the boots stayed on his feet the whole time. I didn't say anything to that. I let him keep going. Dad, I've been sitting with this for 2 days, and I keep landing on the same thing. I let you become invisible. Not because I stopped loving you. Because it was easier. Easier to let Melissa's family think we did it ourselves. Easier to not think too hard about where that money was actually coming from every month. Easier to ask you to skip Thanksgiving than to have one uncomfortable conversation about boundaries with my own wife. That's an honest answer, I said. I'll give you that. I'm not asking you to start the payments again, he said quickly. I want to be clear about that. That's not why I'm here. Melissa and we're going to figure out the mortgage ourselves, even if it means selling the house and downsizing. I should have been standing on my own 2 feet years ago, and I let myself not, because you never made me. I sat with that for a moment, this grown man across from me with my late father's jaw, finally saying something that sounded like it came from somewhere real instead of somewhere rehearsed. Ryan, I need you to hear something clearly, because I mean every word of it. I'm not angry that I helped you. I'd do it again in a heartbeat if you genuinely needed it. What I can't do again is do it quietly while being treated as optional. Those two things happening together is what broke something in me 3 weeks ago, not the money itself. I know, he said. I know that now. And Melissa's parents, are you coming clean about Thanksgiving too? About why I wasn't there? He nodded slowly. I already told them it was my decision, not something you did wrong. I told them the truth is I was ashamed, and I made you pay the price for my shame instead of just being honest with them from the start. I looked at my son for a long moment, searching for something in his face I hadn't seen there in longer than I wanted to admit, and I found it, faint but real, the same steadiness his mother used to have when she finally decided to stop managing a hard thing and just say it. That took something to say, I told him. I mean that. Where do we go from here, Dad? I thought about Gerald's documents sitting in a folder at his office, about the house on Cedar Hollow Road, about Tyler's tools waiting for him at 21, about the quiet, deliberate shape I'd given to everything I still had left to give. We go forward slowly, I said. The same way anything worth trusting gets built. Not all at once, and not because I'm afraid of losing you again. Because it's the only way it actually holds. Christmas came 3 weeks later, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't waiting to find out whether I was invited. Ryan called 2 weeks ahead this time, No careful rehearsed tone in his voice, just a plain question. Dad, will you come for Christmas? Just us this year. No extended family, no pressure. Just wanted you at the table. I said yes. They'd sold the Beaver Creek house by then, moved into something smaller, more honest for what they could actually afford without help. Melissa met me at the door herself when I arrived, and there was something different in the way she looked at me, less like an inconvenient formality to be managed, and more like a person she was actually trying to see clearly for the first time. Walter, she said, I owe you an apology. A real one. I let Ryan carry a version of our story that wasn't true, and I let it cost you something you never should have had to pay. I'm sorry. I told her I appreciated that, and I meant it, though I've lived long enough to know that words spoken in a doorway are only the beginning of an apology, not the whole of it. Whether it would hold, whether this was the start of something real, or just a good moment in a hard season, I couldn't say for certain yet. Some things you only learn with time, the same slow, patient way I learned everything that ever mattered in my life. We sat at their new, smaller table that Christmas, Tyler telling me about the school project he'd finished, the one about family history, the one where he'd apparently written 2 full pages about his grandfather's 44 years at the plant and what it taught him about showing up for people quietly, without needing credit. I didn't know all that stuff about the mortgage when I wrote it, Tyler said, a little sheepish. Mom told me after. I wish I'd known before, so I could have put it in. You put in what mattered, I told him. The rest is just details. After dinner, Ryan walked me out to my car, same as he used to when he was younger, and I'd stay too late talking with Doris in the kitchen. He stood there a moment in the cold, hands in his pockets, the same way he'd stood in my driveway that December evening weeks earlier. Dad, I keep thinking about something you said. About how help going quiet too long makes people stop seeing where it comes from. I don't think I'll ever let that happen again. Not with you. Not with anybody. That's all I ever wanted you to understand, son, I said. Not payback. Not guilt. Just understanding. I drove home that night down familiar roads, past the plant where I'd spent 44 years learning that anything built to last needs its foundation seen, respected, and never taken quietly for granted. I thought about Doris, about what she would have said watching all of this unfold, and I believe, with everything in me, she would have told me exactly what her own mother used to tell her, a lesson I only fully understood myself somewhere around 72 years old. Pay attention to who shows up when nothing's in it for them. That's who you build a life with. Everyone else is just passing through, hoping the foundation holds without ever having to say thank you for it. I pulled into my driveway, into the quiet house I built with my own 2 hands and Doris's steady partnership, and for the first time in months, the quiet didn't feel like something missing. It felt like something earned, something I no longer had to fill with anyone else's approval to know it was worth having. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be noticed for what they give. Others spend their whole lives quietly giving anyway, until the day comes when they finally decide they're done being invisible. I was done, and in the end, that was exactly what brought my son back to the table, seeing me clearly for the first time in years. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real, raw family stories. We'll see you in the next one.